All right, guys, today you're getting a little peek behind the curtain into one of my own personal rookie drafts. This is my main league in Dynasty, so I'm going to go through, how the draft unfolded, my picks, which are highlighted in the white brackets here, what my thought process was on the clock, what my thought process was as the draft unfolded, and why I ultimately took the picks that I did. So as always, like the video, comment down below what you thought of this draft and how it played out. Subscribe to the channel if you are new, and as always, I'll see you on the other side of that intro. Welcome back into Twin Takes Fantasy Football. Today, we're doing something very special. Not often do you get to see, the actual nuts and bolts of the leagues that I partake in, or a lot of fantasy analysts partake in. A lot of times, it's mock drafts. It's with 2 or 3 guys with the CPU doing auto picks. It's not real impactful stuff on, actual fantasy leagues. It's not, it's easy to say things when you're not in the heat of a moment of a league that you've been in for 5 years and you have actual money on the line in. So we're stepping away from the hypothetical and turning towards the concrete, where I have faithfully recreated all 4 rounds of the rookie draft of my main league here in the Sleeper app. It's a little bit of a smaller team, only 10 managers, but it is some of my closest friends that I've had since college. And my main league I put the most time in, most effort in. It's been the one I've been in longest. And I'm just incredibly active, and it means a lot to me week in and week out. And also, a lot of money tied up in it. So definitely, when push comes to shove, you can say a lot of things, but when you're on the clock in a meaningful league, this is what happened. So we're going to go in today, and I'll take you through my thought process of all my picks. As you can see, my picks here are highlighted beautifully in these white brackets. Obviously, I did not graduate college with a degree in graphic design, and since this is the one-man show, this is the best you get to highlight where I am. I personally claimed the 10th spot. I thankfully was fortunate enough to win the league last year and bring home the prize. So as you can see, I moved around quite a bit, traded a lot of draft picks, was very active in the offseason. And these are the 5 picks that I ended up with. One of these picks was actually acquired in the middle of the draft, and I'll talk about my strategy in that one as well. And right before we dive into it, I want to ask, listen, if you don't like my picks, if you like my picks, you agree, whatever, your thoughts on the draft, leave them in the comments below. But please, if you see a pick that's just absolutely egregious, like one of my friends who took Rashee Rice at the 205, if you just want to flame them or roast them in the comments, please do so. So I'm going to take these comments and just forward them to our group chat, and we can all laugh at them together. So please roast my friends, roast all the picks. Maybe it's absurd that in a Superflex league, Jahmyr Gibbs went over Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. Come on, give me those roasts. I would love to just completely tell my friends that the YouTube comments are flaming them. So without further ado, let's jump into my actual draft, and we'll start off at the 108. Very, very disappointed here, because if anyone's been following this channel, they know my absolute love affair with Jordan Addison. I think he's incredibly undervalued at the wide receiver position. Yes, he's a little bit smaller when it comes to his height and weight and stature as a whole, but as far as a polished wide receiver, he is the whole package. His game speed is phenomenal. He is the most polished route runner I've seen in the draft in a while, maybe since Devonta Smith, and he's just a great catcher of the ball. A lot of catches look smooth, no real bobbles, no really main drop concerns. And I tried to move life and limb to pick up Addison, but the manager in front of me just was dead set on not trading away the pick and took Addison and stole him away from me. Absolutely broke my heart. So I ended up with Quentin Johnston. Actually, the manager for 107 and 207, I tried to trade up with him both for Addison and Kendre Miller. He was having no dice on either one of those. So, really, it's frustrating, but this is what happens. You don't always get exactly what you want, and this is the thought process. After my heart was broken when my baby boy Addison was taken from me, what do I do now? And I ultimately, as you can see here, ended up going with Quentin Johnston. Just my thought process behind that is there's a clear top 9 picks. In the post-draft, there was a clear top 9 that we're going to be taking in the first round. Obviously, it didn't happen in this draft due to just certain people's opinions on players, but the consensus across the fantasy world was the 3 quarterbacks, the 2 running backs, and then the 4 wide receivers, including Zay Flowers. It was never going to be Zay for me. I've expressed my immense concerns with his height at 5'9" and just the complete outlier nature of a wide receiver being productive for fantasy at that height. And I just didn't think I could pass on the first-round draft capital of a wide receiver and reach for a second-round running back or even a third-round running back. And as you guys are pretty well known by now, I'm pretty adverse to drafting tight ends early. I would only take tight ends towards the end of the second round, maybe the start of the third round, just because historically they don't deliver relevance to fantasy until 2 years. So it's a very long time to wait to reap the investment you get in drafting these players. Some people are totally fine with that. If you're a competing team and you have spots to burn, you can take the BPA if you think it's Dalton Kincaid and you can sit him behind your current roster and let him develop. But I'm looking for guys to maximize their value immediately. And a lot of times with these tight ends, you can pick them up for cheaper 1 year and 2 years out from now. And Quentin Johnston, in my mind, consensus was the top 9 of the fantasy football. I had the big 8 because I excluded Zay Flowers from that. I was never going to draft him here at the 108. So it was really Quentin Johnston or bust. He was the last one of those 8 guys on the board left for me. This could be rationalization or coping mechanism now that I have ownership bias of Quentin Johnston, but there's a lot of value to be had with QJ here. He goes to one of the best situations with the Los Angeles Chargers. He's tied to a top 5 quarterback in Justin Herbert for the entirety of his rookie career. There's no concerns. That might have been the one downside towards Addison, as the Vikings seems pretty hell-bent on moving on from Kirk Cousins next year, and without a specific plan for a replacement quarterback, they could bring in a vet, which we've seen pan out terribly for a lot of teams in the past few years, or they could bring in a rookie and you just don't know how it's going to develop as they try to establish the rookie and have the rookie develop and transition to the NFL. The Vikings are too good of a team to try to draft a guy like Caleb Williams or be in a position to draft a guy like Caleb Williams or Drake May. So it wouldn't be, one of those top tier prospects that's NFL ready. And then Quentin Johnston, he does get the boost. Something I omitted previously was the fact that Kellen Moore is now there as the offensive coordinator, and we saw what incredible things he did with Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb down in Dallas, and his mindset towards the passing game is going to be a real boon for not only Quentin Johnston, but Keenan Allen as well and Mike Williams. But Quentin Johnston has a path to the field with the injury concerns of both players, plus the age concern of Keenan Allen. I think there's a longer path to be a polished wide receiver for Quentin Johnston than Addison. That's really what fueled my partialness towards Jordan Addison was because Quentin Johnston, I've always equated him to a athlete that plays wide receiver rather than an athletic wide receiver. He has drop issues. He does body catch. I mean, he's just an athletic freak, but it's more of like an athlete that they put at the wide receiver position, and he's still figuring out the route running, the catching, and just like the nuances of the position. So hopefully, he can develop that, and I think he's in a good position with a good support structure around him. And, compared to some of the running backs, a lot of people are very high on Devon A-Chain, very high on Zach Charbonnet. Again, insanely talented. Not the best landing spot, but still a greatly talented running back. It's just from the standpoint that it's hard to pass unless you have that first-round draft capital like a Jahmyr Gibbs or Bijan Robinson. It's really hard to pass a first-round wide receiver for a day 2 running back. Wide receivers, just because of the longevity, we talked about the major discrepancy between the lifespan of a wide receiver for fantasy rather than a running back for fantasy. And they do have potentially a later breakout year. You can still see breakouts by wide receivers in the second and third year. So if Quentin Johnston has a few flashes, but still an overall underwhelming year, his value could still go up as people anticipate him to, progress as a wide receiver and progress in his development, while Zach Charbonnet, this is probably the highest you're ever going to get value for him. Trading him away next year, 2 years, 3 years, the value most likely in 90% of running backs is going to go down after their initial draft. So again, as far as particular value, even if I'm not completely enthused with Quentin Johnston, I can probably get the 108 next year or more if I wanted to move on with him as far as adequate value. Moving on to the 208, where I selected Will Levis, which I know is a shock to many people, as I've been pretty critical of Will Levis and his skill set on this channel. But this is just another atmosphere where you have to take an account of your surroundings. figure out what the value is left on the board and go for it. And I mean, I will say I was probably a little bit of prisoner of value, or prisoner of my team structure and prisoner of need, because my current quarterbacks on my team are led by Geno Smith and Matt Stafford. It is truly an abysmal quarterback room that I have in this league. It makes up for it. My skill position players are pretty good, but the quarterbacks, they're pretty rough. I actually did end up winning the championship only starting Geno Smith, and I actually flexed Devonta Smith in my super flex spot and still managed to win. So yeah, I need help at quarterback position. So again, prisoner of need in that regard. I did try to trade up to Kendre Miller, would make the choice a lot easier, as I believe he's more talented. But we look at Will Levis. This is a super flex draft. Just because of the value of quarterbacks and the positional scarcity, it's going to immediately inflate the value of the quarterback position. And having a guy that is essentially a first round quarterback, technically taken 33rd. I'm well aware of that, but it's been on record that the Titans tried to trade up in the end of the third round to take Will Levis, and he was selected 33rd overall, just one pick out of the top 32. So for my intents and purposes, for my mindset, again, might be ownership bias, I'm viewing him as a first round quarterback. At least that's how I believe the Titans view him, especially with the capital they gave up to trade up to get Will Levis at the 33rd pick. So, having a first round quarterback fall to you at the end of the second round was just too immense of value to pass up, especially when I have such a glaring need on my team, as well as the fact that, he had the highest draft capital of any of the players remaining on the board. And again, same argument I used with Quentin Johnston was the fact that Will Levis, if he takes the Patrick Mahomes-esque route, I'm not commenting on Patrick Mahomes, I'm saying he sits behind Tannehill for a year the way Mahomes sat behind Alex Smith. He comes in, backs up maybe 1 or 2 games towards the end of the season, shows some flashes. His value will only go up, especially in a super flex league. The quarterback values are going to be immensely high. If he has the potential to start next year, I could certainly trade him away for a first round pick. That's just what the valuation of starting quarterbacks is, or generally tends to be in a super flex league. I was a little heartbroken. I loved Roshan, very, very high on Roshan. Basically had him penciled into this pick for the 2 months leading up to the draft, but I just was operating on an assumption that Will Levis would not be there. And if we look historically at hit rates of skill position players when it comes to the end of the second round into the third round, whether it's a Roshan, any of these 4 wide receivers right here, that historical hit rate's around 20%. And we look at the historical hit rates of first round wide receiver or first round quarterbacks, they're around 40%. So I'm doubling my chance to have a fantasy relevant asset by taking Will Levis, and I'm going to play those odds. And unfortunately, we'll see what happens if I was rightly or wrongly took the gamble on Will Levis. Moving on to the 305. This was the first pick that I made. I didn't come into the draft with the 305, but this is a pick that I made when I saw Tank fall to the 305. I knew the manager of Team 5 here, he had a pretty stacked running back room. He has Austin Eckler, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Tyler Algier, Kenneth Gainwell. He's also very, very confident in Dalvin Cook finding a productive landing spot for this year, so I knew he really didn't care about the running backs. And honestly, this was the fact that I missed out on Roshan Johnson. I missed out on the guy that I really, really liked, but Tank Bigsby, in my pre-draft process, he was my running back 4 behind Charbonnet, Gibbs, and Robinson. I just think that, he didn't go to the greatest landing spot because he will be stuck behind Etienne. I don't think he's going to eat into a ton of workload from Etienne, but, as far as talent is concerned, I thought he was a top 5 talent at the running back position. And he did have day 2 draft capital. We know day 2 draft capital is very, very important for these running backs. He was drafted in the 3rd round. So I went ahead. I traded away Kadarius Toney for the 305 plus some future draft capital in the 2024 draft. I have a good wide receiver core, so Kadarius Toney was, he was trade bait on my team. That's how I viewed him. And if I could jump in and pick up Tank Bigsby just to, I was feeling very miffed at my Will Levis pick. I was feeling a lot of regret at not taking Roshan Johnson. I did need running back help. So basically did this trade to mitigate my feelings of passing on Roshan. And I think Tank Bigsby has, equal talent, equal opportunity as Roshan. So I kind of mitigate those feelings with the pick here. That's truthfully why I made the deal. It wasn't because I was overly high on Tank Bigsby. It's because I was actually quite regretting Roshan Johnson. But hey, in the 3rd round, you have the ability to move in and take those shots. And, we've seen injury concerns with Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne wasn't not drafted by the current regime that's head by Doug Peterson. I know Peterson is a big fan of Etienne, but he said we're never going to make him the workhorse that he was last year. The 73% of all touches out of the backfield is not going to happen again. They need a guy to come in and help take that load off. And I think, it's very telling that they went and spent day 2 draft capital on Tank Bigsby. Has a very similar upside to the way Roshan does as well. So I'm very happy, if Kadarius Toney breaks off as the wide receiver 1 hype of the Kansas City Chiefs, it'll be a bad move in hindsight, but for where it is right now with the uncertainty around Toney's injury and just the way that the Chiefs spread around the ball, there's not a single 1,000-yard receiver there last year outside of Kelsey, who's a tight end. It was a risk I was willing to take. Moving on to the 4th round. These are just dart throws. The 4th round really is quite irrelevant. A lot of these players will ultimately get dropped, will ultimately be very irrelevant for fantasy, but I had the 402 and the 410, so you might as well use them anyways, right? If you have the pick, might as well use it. No one's really going to trade for a 4th round pick unless someone was like super high on Sean Tucker, if they had been, a Devy guy that's been following his career at Syracuse. But right here, Zach Evans, I ultimately went with him, and this pick did happen before the Sony Michel signing, so it looks a little bit worse in hindsight, but at the time I was looking at it, Cam Akers, injury concerns, still has an Achilles injury that he did return from, was productive last year, but it's basically a death sentence for a lot of running backs and causes lingering problems throughout the rest of the running back's career. He'll never have that explosiveness that he had in his rookie season. Zach Evans comes immediately into the backup spot, maybe pushed back a little bit now with Sony Michel, but at the time I was thinking, Zach Evans can come in, maybe vulture some touches away from Cam Akers. He's a little bit bigger than Cam Akers here. Coming at 5'11", Cam Akers is around 5'9", a little bit, maybe a little bit stockier than Zach Evans, but at least Zach Evans has the height on him. And we saw there was quite a rift between Cam Akers and the management of the Los Angeles Rams last year. He was almost traded. There was a point where he said, I'm never going to play another snap for the Rams. Somehow they came back together and they mended that relationship. Sean McVay has come out and said that he sees quite a huge role for Cam Akers in this offense, but you never know. There was quite a fight that almost led to divorce last year. So if something happens, if there's a disagreement again, or if there's some sort of snafu with Cam Akers, Zach Evans could step in and be relevant, and then if he comes in and takes over, I can flip him for a 2nd or 3rd round pick down the line. I see the upside in that value. Finally, at the 410, very, very relevant pick, because after this, the draft is over anyways. Not like I was stealing him away from anyone else. We do, in our league, our draft free agents, they go immediately to waivers. So it's not first come, first serve. It's a little more fair. So everyone gets an off-season fab budget that you can use on UDFAs, undrafted free agents, and a few were picked up, but I didn't think there was too much value left to be had. But Xavier Hutchinson, he's a 6th round wide receiver, which bodes pretty poorly for his translation to the NFL. Not many 6th round wide receivers find productive careers in the NFL, but in a draft class that was particularly small, very undersized. We look at Downs and Flowers as 2 of the premier examples. Xavier Hutchinson fills out that more typical wide receiver role, 6'3", 205 pounds, and he goes to a Houston Texans wide receiver room that is pretty abysmal. You're looking at Tank Dell, who's 5'8". He was drafted in the 3rd round, well ahead of Xavier Hutchinson, but that was CJ Stroud coming in and giving the stamp of approval to Tank Dell. But I do have tremendous concerns at that 5'8" height for Tank Dell, and I think I view him more as a gadget player rather than an actual true alpha wide receiver. You have the shell of Robert Woods coming down there. I don't think he's going to be very impactful. You have John Mechie, who I personally think does have the highest upside to become something in that wide receiver room. He has the highest draft capital with the 2nd round draft capital, and was a very, very talented player at Alabama. But, he missed last year for medical purposes. He had cancer. Thankfully, he is all better. We are very happy to hear that the treatment went well. But taking a year off can sometimes do something to your football prowess, your football IQ, and didn't really get that rookie year to learn about the NFL. And finally, you have Nico Collins, who's been there for 3 years, but just really hasn't established himself as something. And I don't think that now he's had his chance in the sun. And I think with, the new coach coming in, the new offensive coordinators coming in, that they're probably not as tied to Nico Collins as they are with the guys that they're bringing in now, with Amechi, with Xavier, with Tank Dell. So, as far as being the biggest, most dominant guy, and he was incredibly productive at Iowa State too. Over his past 2 years, averaged 1,000 yards. In 2021, had 980 yards with 5 touchdowns. This past year had 1,140 yards with 6 touchdowns. Just an incredibly productive wide receiver, and we all know that the most accurate indicator of production in fantasy in the NFL is college fantasy production, and Xavier Hutchinson was very productive. Not to say that it's going to outweigh the fact that he's a sixth round draft capital. I'm just telling you the upsides that I saw in him is why I was willing to spend the 4-10 pick on him. So there it is. That's recapping my personal draft. Again, a draft that I have quite a few, like, very high vested stake in. So, I can come on here and I can preach all I want. I can preach that I think Hendon Hooker has a better spot or more upside than Will Levis when he finally takes over the reins, and how much I love Ben Johnston as an offensive coordinator compared to the shambles that is the offensive coordinator situation in Tennessee at the moment. But, when push comes to shove, when you're looking at the actual values, how the market perceives these players, when you're on the clock, this is what happens. And hopefully, giving you this insight into my mindset and why I drafted these players and what I actually did will give you guys some reassurance that, I'm incredibly transparent with my opinions, with my thought process. And, this gives you reassurance that I'm actually giving you good, genuine advice and following up on what I say. And, transparency builds trust. So hopefully you can trust me as a modicum of some of the fantasy content that you consume. But with that being said, again, don't forget to flame my friends for any of these wild picks that you see here in the comments below. And as always, take care, guys.